Good evening, guys. Welcome back to your channel Ansarkari. So let's start with our today's discussion for 9th of December. From firstly, we'll take up the Hindu newspaper, and after that, we'll move on to the Financial Express, and we'll also take up the Mint. So we'll be starting with the Hindu, and we're not starting from the first page because there's a lot of political news today in the newspaper. So that's why we are starting just from the relevant information that is important for us. So we'll be talking in detail about the sustained growth and what has been the trend when we talk about remittances as far as India's performance is concerned. So remittances to India, they are set to touch a record of $100 billion in this year, that is 2022, according to the World Bank's latest migration and development brief, which is titled The Remittances Brave Global Headwinds. So you should be knowing that this report is published by World Bank, and India is going to be the first country in the world which will set this record of achieving $100 billion of remittances. So we need to know what is a remittance. So talking in general sense, or in very general and basic meaning, it denotes a sum of money which is sent by one party to another. But these days the term, it describes money that is sent by someone who's working abroad to their family back home. So suppose a person who's an Indian and he's been working in America, and he's sending back some of his savings and his earnings back to India to his family. So that is considered as a remittance. And in case of India, when we talk about what are the largest sources of remittances for us, so that includes the countries which are member of Gulf Cooperation Council. So from this, we come to know what are the members of GCC. So that includes UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, and Kuwait. And other important sources for remittances for India includes US and UK also. So you should be knowing about this. Now talking about what has been the general trend this year, we see that remittances, they represent an even larger source of external finance for the low and middle income countries in 2022 compared to the foreign direct investment, official development assistance, and portfolio investment flows. So remittance is the largest source when we compare them from all the other factors. Then the top five recipient countries this year, they are expected to be India at the first position. As I told you that we are going to touch the $100 billion mark, followed by Mexico, China, Philippines, and Egypt. So that is how our performance is when it comes to remittances. And what has been the reason behind the sustained growth in remittances? So the main reason is the gradual reopening of various sectors in the host country economies after the pandemic, and the improved migrant workers' incomes and employment situation is another factor that is obviously linked with the situation that has been improving from the pandemic. And an allied reason was the migrants' their determination to help their families back home, given the impact that the pandemic had. And the report also notes that 10% growth in remittances achieved in the year 2021, that too against the backdrop of the pandemic. So even in 2021, we saw a growth in the remittances inflow. So you should be knowing about this trend. It becomes important from the perspective of prelims examination. Then moving ahead, what are the reasons behind the resilience of India's inward remittance flows? So what are the factors which are driving such a huge amount of remittances inflow in the Indian economy? So according to this report, a structural shift has been witnessed when we talk about India's remittance economy. The first one is in terms of the top destination countries from which we are now receiving remittances. And the second is in terms of the nature of jobs which are held by the migrants. So the nature of jobs have also changed. Now we'll be talking about in little detail about both these factors that have been led to the structural shift in India's remittance economy. So, talking about the first one, so we see that a gradual structural shift in the Indian migrants to key destinations from largely low-skilled informal employment in the GCC countries to dominant share of high-skilled jobs in high-income countries such as US, UK, East Asia, which includes countries like Singapore, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. So that is one shift that has been witnessed, and it has definitely led to a higher contribution to remittances. And when we also look at the fact, we see that between the period 2016-17 to 2020-21, the remittances from the US, UK, Singapore, they have increased. So we are seeing an increase in remittances when we are talking about the high income countries, and that has gone up from 26% to 36%, and the share from the five GCC countries, they have dropped from 54% to 28%. So again, the data is also pointing towards the same direction. And in the year 2020-21, the US, with a share of 23%, it surpassed Saudi Arabia as India's top source country for remittances. So earlier, Saudi Arabia, it was the country from which we were receiving maximum amount of remittances, but now the position has been taken by US with a share of 23%. So this is important for PT. Note it down, or if you can remember, that's great. Moving ahead, we see that specifically now people, they have shifted more towards the high skilled, high salaried jobs in the services sector. And taking also one of the factors which is also driving higher amounts of remittances into India is the depreciation of Indian rupee. And we know that Indian rupee, it has depreciated by 10% between January and September this year itself. So depreciation of the domestic currency helps in, we can say, when $1 was around 70 rupees, and now when it is around 80 to 81 rupees. So obviously when the, we can say, the amount in which it gets translated or converted into Indian rupees increases with the depreciation of Indian rupee vis-a-vis the US dollar. So that is one the benefit. And what the report has to say about the future trends of remittances. So it says that the growth in remittances, it is expected to fall to 2% in the coming year ahead, as the GDP growth in the high income countries, that is expected to slow down. And for South Asia also, we expect the remittances to slow down, and the same goes for the GCC countries. But when we specifically talk about India, we see, or the World Bank, the report predicts that the remittances to India, they are forecasted to grow by 4% next year. So that is the entire case about the remittances economy. Moving ahead, so what will India offer during its presidency of G20? So here we'll be talking more about the nitty-gritties about G20 and the G20 forum and the summit, which becomes important from a prelims perspective. So what is the history of G20 forum? It was first established in the year 1999 by the finance ministers and the central bank governors of 7 countries, which includes Canada, US, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK. And the uniting factor was the 1997-1998 financial crisis and its aftermath. And in 2009, G20, it was designated the premier forum for international economic cooperation. The forum initially dealt with matters which were related only to macroeconomics, but over time, its agenda has expanded to cover issues relating to trade, climate change, sustainable development, health, agriculture. So it has become more broad-based, we can say. And what does India's presidency mean? So the group, it does not have a permanent secretariat. Then the presidency, it is supported by previous, current, and the future holders of the post, which are together called the Troika. So the current Troika is India, and it includes Indonesia and Brazil. So that is the Troika for 2023. And India, it plans to showcase its philosophies and principles of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, which means one earth, one family, one future, and also life, that stands for lifestyle for environment, given the pace and intensity of climate change. And also we strive for just equitable growth for all in the world. So that is what we as India are aiming in the upcoming G20 summit, and how the G20 forum works. So the process under G20, it is divided into two parallel tracks. The one is the finance track and the second one is the Sherpa track. So in finance track, it is led by the finance ministers and the central bank governors of the member nations. And talking about the Sherpa track, the Sherpas, which are personal emissaries of leaders, they lead the Sherpa track. So they oversee the negotiations all through the year, discussing agenda items for the summit, and also different international organizations. In the they also participate in the working groups. So the international organizations includes the United Nations, the IMF, World Bank, and OECD. So that is the key points from it. Moving ahead, so the process to appoint ad hoc judges. So ad hoc judges are those judges which are only appointed for one specific purpose. And once the target is fulfilled, the task is done and their responsibility is fulfilled. So Article 224A of the Constitution, it talks of appointment of ad hoc judges in high courts. And also when we talk about the process, so Chief Justice of India recommends the name of ad hoc judges. So the court, it has identified five situations in which the judiciary could seek the aid of ad hoc judges. And out of those five situations, two are mentioned over here. So the first one is when the vacancies they are over or they cross the mark of 20% of the sanctioned strength. So when vacancies they increase beyond 20% of the sanctioned strength, then we should go for appointing the ad hoc judges. And second is when the cases they had been pending for over 5 years. So that is the information that becomes important from the perspective of ad hoc judges. And Rajya Sabha, it has cleared the wildlife bill, which promises better protection. So better protection, what are the measures which are mentioned in this bill? So it would be ensuring protection of elephants, sorry, and they'll be conserved according to the provisions of this act. So protecting the wildlife through better management of the protected areas, and also rationalizing the schedules which list out the species under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Then we have been talking about GM mustard, which has been given the environmental approval by the Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee. So we see that GM mustard, that is the DMH11 variety, it has shown higher yield. And obviously Supreme Court, its technical expert committee does not approve of GM mustard, citing that it can have adverse impact on human health. And when India has around thousands of varieties of mustard, so why are we going for adopting a GM mustard variety when we have thousands of options? And the Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee, it is an autonomous body of experts which is authorized by the Environment Ministry. And the only transgenic seed that is permitted to be commercially cultivated in India right now is BT cotton. So this is an important fact for PT. And yeah, we have been discussing it a lot of number of times, so I hope you will be able to remember this. So now talking about the important news from business page, we see that the BCG's head Sinha, he says there is an urgent need to fix the basics of water education and health. So he says that we need to expedite the water pricing policy in face of plummeting water table, which risks of increasing the frequency of droughts ahead in future. And he also urges doubling the spending on education health to tap the demographic dividend. So he says that there are certain fundamental gaps which needs to be addressed. And when we talk about China, so China, it started its growth by first fixing the water. So India, we did not go that way, and that's why we are seeing decline in our water table. So if we do not fix water, we cannot double the agricultural productivity, which is definitely going to have adverse impact on food security. So we are still, our Indian economy, it is still a factor driven economy, and we need to shift towards an innovation driven economy. So this can be this sentence can be a part of your mains answer. We need to shift from factor driven to innovation driven economy. Now let's take up the Financial Express. Okay, so in Financial Express, we have, okay, so our ex-revenue secretary, that is Tarun Bajaj sir, he says, or he pitches for tax on agricultural income. And the second thing that he's talking about is that we should focus on, or we should go with expanding our tax base. We should focus on ensuring that we are taking steps to expand the tax base and not increase the income tax rates. So he says that the people who are above the income tax threshold, they must pay the tax irrespective of their source of income. So be it from the agriculture sector or any other sector, if they have that capability and if they stand above the income tax threshold, so they should definitely pay income tax. And as I told you that we need to focus more upon expanding the tax base, basically including more and more people under the tax net. And obviously, this issue is highly and politically sensitive. So, right now, the agricultural income is not taxed in India. Moving ahead, we have one more important thing. Okay, so we'll be talking in detail about the CBDC, that is the central bank digital currency, which is also called as e-rupee. So, talking about the anonymity in CBDC. So, RBI Act amendment, it recognizes CBDC as the fiat currency. So, there is no difference in the eyes of law or in the treatment between the paper currency and this digital e-rupee. And there are concerns about maintaining the anonymity of the transactions which will be involving e-rupee. So banks, they definitely, they'll be doing KYC norms, they'll be following them. So that will lead to establishing the identity at the source of funds. And when CBDC, it is drawn from a user's account and it is put in his wallet. So that would be able to track. And also RBI is also talking about the entire transaction that would be involving between wallet to wallet transaction. So even that has the potential of being tracked. So we need to ensure that these transactions, they are not tracked and they are kept anonymous. And other issue is that the daily cash transactions beyond rupees 2 lakhs, they are prohibited for most classes of users. So that is the provision as of now. And talking about the difference between CBDC and the cryptocurrency. So cryptocurrencies, they are free from any regulation. They are not regulated and their value is it is determined, or it depends upon what is the sentiment of investors. So basically it is driven by the market forces of supply and demand plainly, and they are definitely, they're volatile. Talking about CBDCs, they are backed by the central bank of the country, and their value is equivalent to the bank notes. So that is the difference between CBDC and cryptocurrencies. And talking about the difference between CBDC and UPI. So there will be no routing or intermediation by the banks when it comes to the CBDC-R, that is retail transactions. And in UPI transactions, on the other hand, they hinge on the interbank messaging for amounts to be debited from one and credited to another. So the role of bank comes in when we talk about the UPI transactions, but there is not going to be any intermediation of banks when we are talking about the CBDC transactions. And CBDC-R, that is CBDC retail, will be entirely dependent on wallets. So that is the difference in talking about how many countries they have fully functional CBDCs. So there are 11 countries right now, and talking about Denmark. So Denmark's feasibility study in 2017 concluded that CBDC had economic instability risk. So that is also one of the concerns. And talking about why is having a CBDC an imperative for India and how will it operate? So as I just told you that there is one CBDC-R and the another one is CBDC-W. So W stands for wholesale, R stands for retail. And why do we need e-rupee or a digital currency? So the first reason is that we need to bring down the cost of printing paper money, which is huge right now. So when people shift more towards the usage of CBDC, the cost will come down, and obviously the requirement of paper currency would reduce. So that's how we'll be able to bring down the cost of printing paper currency, and it will also help in financial inclusion and promoting innovation in the cross-border payments space. So that is the second benefit. And talking about the CBDC-R, so that will be available to all classes of users, while CBDC-W will be available only to select financial institutions. And CBDC-R, it will be token-based, and CBDC-W will be account-based. So that is important from PT. So now let's take the Mint. So in this, we'll be talking about again the monetary policy, the recent stance that has been taken by RBI. So we see, or do we expect that with this rate hike, are we moving towards a turning point, or was this rate hike a turning point? Because the amount of increase in the repo rate was comparably less when we compare it with the past increases by the RBI. So the repo rate, it has been increased from 4% to 6.25%. And when we look at the trend of the price changes, we see that this orange line, it is showing the trend of the wholesale prices. So we are seeing a downward trend, and it stands at 8.39% in October. And looking at the consumer prices, even they are seeing a downward trend, stands at 6.77%. So is RBI charting a softer approach given the increase in repo rate has been of 35 basis points? So the recent hike, it suggests that central bank is charting a softer approach, and the standing deposit facility rate and the marginal standing facility rate, they were also increased to 6% and 6.5% respectively. Then what factors have influenced the Monetary Policy Committee and causing this rate hike? So the first one is the US Fed has been increasing the rate. So that is obviously one of the factor, as our economy is dependent upon the US economy. And also in the month of November, we saw that the foreign portfolio investors, we clocked net inflows of around $4,000 million, which was highest after January. Then also, we see that retail and the wholesale inflation, the indices, they've been witnessing a downward trend. So that was the second factor. And the third was there was considerable apprehension that the restrictive approach, it could worsen the anticipated slowdown in India's economic growth rate. So there were two factors mainly which drove this rate hike. Then has RBI been effective in containing inflation? So no doubt we've seen that inflation has been declining from its peak of 7.8% in April this year to 6.77% in October. So a decline of 1%, but still it remains above the safe target range of inflation, that is above 6%. And this is mainly due to the prices of commodities of such as the crude oil. The prices of crude oil has been cooling down, so that's why inflation has come down. The second factor is effective management of the supply chains, and the third factor is the fiscal steps that have been taken by the government that have helped in curbing the inflationary pressures. So you should be knowing about these three factors which have helped in cooling the inflation down. And so I guess that's it for today. Thank you for joining Ansarkari, and I hope you have understood the things nicely. And you can also go through the video once again, and a PDF would also be attached, so you can open that PDF and utilize it to its maximum. And see you tomorrow. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you.